Okay, so today we're diving into some interesting stuff you sent over. Looks like it's all focused on Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire.
Yeah, and specifically, there are these accusations of grifting being thrown around, particularly around their whole push to get Derek Chauvin pardoned.
Right, and we've got a good bit to work with here. It looks like a video titled Ben Shapiro Daily Wire Grift Got Exposed.mp4 is kind of the centerpiece.
Yep, and that video pulls in a lot of other stuff, snippets from different videos and social media posts like that.
Okay, cool. And then we've also got some of Shapiro's past statements you dug up, and of course all the details from that Pardon Chauvin website.
Yes, we can really see how all these pieces fit together, get a sense of the different perspectives on this whole thing.
Right. So it seems like the big question you're trying to get to the bottom of is whether Shapiro's call for this pardon is, like a genuine change of heart or if there's something else going on.
See, exactly. Is this really about justice for Derek Chauvin in his eyes? Or is this all, potentially calculated to achieve some other goal?
Right. So let's jump right in. I guess the most direct accusation comes from the main video you sent, where the creator flat out says Shapiro is using this whole situation as a grift. And they even mention bringing this up 5 days before the video was.
Yeah, they were already kind of sensing something was off even before it became, bigger discussion.
So what was the basis of that initial concern even before it kind of blew up?
Well, the argument even at that early stage was basically that Shapiro was just jumping on this very emotionally charged issue as a way to drum up attention.
Right, using the controversy to his advantage.
Yeah, and the suspicion was that it was all very calculated, less about a genuine belief that Chauvin deserved a pardon and more about, potentially making money or gaining influence or something like that.
Makes sense. And then you've also got Rob Smith's perspective from his appearance on that Patrick Bet David podcast, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Smith makes some great points. One thing that really stuck out to me was his whole analysis of where this pardon movement even came from.
Yeah, I remember that. What was his take on that?
Well, he basically questioned how organic it really was. He pointed out that most big national conversations tend to start from the ground up, right?
Right, like a grassroots kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But this whole Pardon Chauvin thing felt very much like it was coming from the top down.
Yeah.
From someone like Shapiro, who has a huge platform.
Right. So instead of it bubbling up from, everyday people, it was more like Shapiro was trying to dictate the narrative.
Exactly. And that's where Smith's next point comes in, which is, who actually benefits from this whole conversation.
Right. He was pretty skeptical that this was actually helpful to anyone.
Yeah, he basically concluded that didn't seem to benefit. Exactly. And, one thing that Smith said that really resonated with me was that this wasn't something people were widely talking about before Shapiro got involved.
Yeah, it definitely felt like he was the one who made it a big deal.
Right. And that's a pretty crucial observation because it makes you wonder why he chose this particular issue to focus on, what was the motivation behind that.
Okay, so then there's the Pardon Chauvin campaign itself, and specifically that pardon.com website, which seems to be at the center of these grifting accusations.
Yeah, what's interesting about that site is that it doesn't actually function as a standalone platform. When you go to pardon.com, it just redirects you straight to the Daily Wire's website.
Oh, really? So it's not even its own separate thing?
Nope. It's all part of the Daily Wire's online ecosystem, which is pretty telling when you think about the accusations being made.
Right, because it directly links the pardon campaign to the Daily Wire's own interests.
Exactly. And that brings us to Mark Dice's analysis, where he brings up Shapiro's background as a Harvard-educated lawyer.
Right. Dice makes a pretty interesting point about that.
Yeah, he basically says, look, Shapiro, with all his legal training, has got to know that a presidential pardon can only apply to federal crimes, right?
Right, not state crimes.
Exactly, and that's key because Derek Chauvin was convicted on state murder charges, which a presidential pardon wouldn't even touch.
Right. He's serving time for that state conviction.
Exactly. Now, Dice does mention the separate federal civil rights charges that Chauvin was also convicted of.
Right, which a presidential pardon could actually affect.
Yeah, but Dice's main point is Shapiro really unaware of this basic distinction between state and federal charges, which seems pretty unlikely given his legal background, or is he being intentionally misleading to his audience?
So Dice is basically saying either Shapiro's making a rookie mistake, which doesn't seem likely, or he's deliberately misrepresenting the situation.
Exactly. And that's the question Dice wants people to consider. Is Shapiro being genuine here, or is there something else going on?
Right. So it's like Dice is implying that the whole push for presidential pardon for a state conviction is either a major blunder on Shapiro's part or it's serving some other purpose.
Right. And the suggestion is that Shapiro is playing up this idea that a presidential pardon is a simple solution, like we've seen with other high-profile cases.
But in reality, it's not that straightforward in this case.
Exactly. And then there's that sign the petition button on the pardon.com website, which is another key piece of the grifting puzzle.
Yeah. What's the catch there?
Well, the fine print is that by clicking that button, you're agreeing to receive emails from the Daily Wire, including news and promotional offers and all that.
No, so it's basically a way for them to collect email addresses.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a classic move for building a marketing. It's like they're using this seemingly noble cause of getting Chauvin pardoned as a way to gather valuable contact.
Right, so the argument is that the real goal isn't actually about helping Chauvin, it's about boosting the Daily Wire's marketing reach.
Exactly. And the fact that it's all tied to this very sensitive and controversial issue just makes it seem even more like a calculated move.
Yeah, right. It's like they're exploiting the controversy for their own gain.
And the video you shared also brought up this idea that the Daily Wire might be experiencing a decline in popularity, which could be fueling this whole thing.
Yeah, they mentioned that some big names have left the Daily Wire and their viewership might be down.
Right. And the argument is that if they are feeling the pressure, they might be more likely to resort to these attention-grabbing tactics, even if they're not entirely sincere.
Right. It's like they're trying to make up for lost ground by stirring up controversy.
Exactly. And a case like Derek Chauvin's is pretty much guaranteed to generate a lot of buzz online,
Right, because it's such a hot button issue.
Exactly. So even if they're not actually committed to the cause of getting Chauvin pardoned, they can still benefit from all the traffic and engagement it brings to their website.
Right. So it's all about driving those numbers up. Subscriptions to Daily Wire plus email signups, sales of their products.
Exactly. And it raises the question of whether the Daily Wire's business interests are influencing their editorial decision. Are they choosing content based on what will get the most clicks, even if it means exploiting a sensitive topic?
And you got to admit, it's a topic that pretty much everyone has strong feelings about. It's not something you can be neutral on.
Yeah, all the sources we looked at agree that this whole George Floyd, Derek Chauvin situation is incredibly controversial and divisive.
And that's what makes it so effective for generating clicks and views and all that,
Exactly. The argument is that the Daily Wire is knowingly tapping into that controversy and using it to their advantage.
Right. Regardless of your personal stance on the issue, you're probably going to be drawn in by it. You're going to want to see what people are saying.
And that's what the Daily Wire is counting on. They're using this heightened emotional state to drive traffic to their platform.
So it's not so much about genuine dialogue or debate. It's about capitalizing on the outrage and the attention that comes with it.
Exactly. And that brings us to the question of Ben Shapiro's own past statements about the George Floyd case, because the video you shared highlights a pretty stark contrast between his initial reaction and what he's saying now.
Right. I remember that. So what did Shapiro say back when this all first happened?
Well, according to the video, he was pretty clear in his condemnation of what happened to George Floyd. He even said something like, "We all agree on George Floyd," implying that everyone recognized it was wrong and that Chauvin should be held accountable.
Right. So he was on board with the general consensus that this was a grave injustice.
Exactly. And while he also condemned the riots and the looting that followed, he specifically acknowledged that George Floyd's rights had been violated by a police officer.
Okay, so a pretty clear stance against Chauvin at that time.
Yep. And now he's calling for a pardon, which is a pretty significant shift.
Right. So how do the sources explain this apparent change of heart?
Well, the video specifically says that the issue isn't about Shapiro's right to change his mind. People are allowed to evolve their view.
Right, but they're more concerned with the motivation behind it.
Exactly. The argument is that the timing of this shift is just too convenient. It comes right when the Daily Wire could potentially benefit from a boost in engagement and revenue.
Right. So it looks less like a genuine evolution of thought and more like a calculated move to capitalize.
Exactly. And the fact that this change of heart coincides with this whole petition drive, which is designed to collect email addresses, just adds to the suspicion,
It's like all these pieces fit together a little too perfectly.
Right. And the commentators are saying that the speed at which Shapiro seemingly flipped his position, combined with this whole email list-building scheme, just makes it look like a grift,
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of this alleged grift as the sources lay it out. What's the end game here?
Well, the ultimate goal seems to be multi-layered. It's not just about getting email addresses, although that's a big part of it.
Right, because that gives them direct access to market their stuff.
Exactly. And that includes their Daily Wire Plus subscription service, their Jeremy's Razors, their Daily Wire chocolate, all of it.
Right. So they're using this pardon campaign as a way to funnel people into their whole ecosystem.
Exactly. It's like a gateway drug. You get sucked in by the controversy, and then before you know it, you're getting targeted ads for all their product.
Okay. And the video also questions whether Shapiro really needed to go the public petition route if he was truly sincere about getting Chauvin pardoned.
Yeah, they bring up his connections to people like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. They even mentioned that Shapiro was Johnson's guest at one point.
Right. So the argument is that if he really wanted to advocate for a pardon, he could have gone through those channels, you know?
Exactly. He could have worked behind the scenes, lobbied those with influence over Trump, maybe even talked to Trump himself.
Right, so why not do that instead of this whole public campaign?
Well, the video suggests that maybe Shapiro knew a pardon for state crime was a long shot.
Yeah.
Maybe people close to Trump would have shut that down immediately.
Right, because it would be legally and politically problematic.
Exactly. So maybe Shapiro knew that a public campaign focused on a presidential pardon, even if it was unlikely to succeed, would still generate a ton of attention and serve his purposes,
Right, it's like he knew it was a losing battle, but he went ahead with it anyway because it was still beneficial.
And to add fuel to the fire, you've got the Daily Wire themselves actively promoting this whole pardon Chauvin narrative.
Yeah, they even go so far as to say Chauvin was railroaded, right?
Exactly. And that's seen as further proof that this whole thing is about serving the Daily Wire's interest,
Right, because they're using their own platform to amplify this message.
And by framing it as a case of injustice, they're not only driving traffic to their website and encouraging people to sign the petition, they're also reinforcing their worldview among their existing audience.
Right, it creates this feedback loop where the controversy fuels their content and their content fuels the controversy.
Exactly. And it all leads back to potentially benefiting their bottom line,
Okay, so to summarize, we've looked at the initial accusations against Shapiro, the arguments made by various commentators like Rob Smith and Mark Dice, the specifics of the pardon campaign and that website, the claims about the Daily Wire's Post Klein, and how that might be playing into the inherently controversial nature of the topic. Shapiro's apparent shift in stance, the mechanic of the alleged grift, and the Daily Wire's own role in promoting.
Yeah, we've really gone through it all. We've examined the timeline, the evidence, the reasoning behind these accusations, and how it all connects to this idea of a grift.
So for those listening, you should now have a pretty good grasp of the claims being made, the timing of this pardon push, the way that pardon.com website works, and how it's used to collect data, the possible motivations related to the Daily Wire's business interests, and the fact that Shapiro seems to have contradicted his early.
We've given you all the pieces of the puzzle as presented in your sources. Now it's up to you to decide.
Right. Is this a genuine attempt to right a wrong, or is it something else entirely?
And this whole deep dive raises some interesting questions for you to ponder. Was there any real grassroots support for a Chauvin pardon before Shapiro got involved, or was this something he manufactured entirely?
Right. And could there be other reasons for Shapiro's change of heart that these sources didn't mention,
It's always good to consider different perspectives.
And it's also worth thinking about how audiences react to these kinds of online campaigns. Are they aware of the potential for manipulation? Are they critical of the information they're being fed?
Those are all things to keep in mind.
And if you want to dig deeper, you could look into how Shapiro has handled other controversial issues in the past, see if there are any patterns in his approach.
Yeah, they could be really revealing.
And if you could find data on the Daily Wire's subscriber growth or email list growth around the time of this pardon campaign, that would be super insightful. But that kind of information is hard to come by.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not always public.
But if you could get your hands on it, it would definitely add another layer to this whole thing.
And finally, don't just stick to the sources you've already seen. Try to find reactions to this campaign from different sides of the political spectrum.
Right. Get a broader view of the conversation.
Because there's always more to the story than what any one source tells you.
Exactly.
So keep digging, keep questioning, and form your own informed opinion.
That's what it's all about.
All right, well, that about wraps it up for today's deep dive. Thanks for sending us this fascinating stuff.
Yeah, this was a good one.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
Definitely keeps you thinking.
All right, see you next time.